Have you ever sat in church and felt pressured to give, hearing things like, if you don't tithe, God won't bless you, or you're robbing God if you don't give 10%? Many Christians experience guilt and fear due to these teachings, as some churches make tithing seem like the key to blessings or even salvation. But is this really what the Bible teaches? In this video, we'll uncover the truth about tithing, why some pastors insist it's required, whether or not tithing could send you to hell, and how God truly wants us to give. Stay with us. This might challenge everything you've been taught. What the Bible really says about tithing. To understand the truth about tithing, we need to go back to where it all started, the Old Testament. Tithing in the Bible was never about making religious leaders rich. It was never a business model. It was a system of provision under the Old Covenant, designed specifically for the people of Israel. In the Old Testament, tithing wasn't a voluntary donation, it was a law, and it served specific purposes. It provided for the Levites, the priests who had no inheritance of land and relied on the tithe for survival. It helped the poor, widows, and orphans. A portion of the tithe was set aside every 3 years to care for those in need. It funded the temple and religious services. The tithe maintained the temple in Jerusalem. But here's something most pastors won't tell you. Did you know that tithing wasn't always 10%? When you add up all the different tithes required in the Old Testament, it actually totaled about 23% per year, not just 10%. And here's another crucial point. Tithing was not a universal command for all people. It was specifically for Israel under the Old Covenant. So what happened when Jesus came? Does the New Testament require tithing? Here's the shocker. Nowhere in the New Testament does Jesus or the apostles command Christians to tithe. Instead, the emphasis shifts toward giving from the heart. 2 Corinthians 9:7. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Look at those key phrases, not reluctantly or under compulsion. What you have decided in your heart. God loves a cheerful giver. If tithing was still a strict law, why would Paul say that giving should never be done under compulsion? So why do some churches still preach tithing as a non-negotiable requirement? Simple, power and money. Why some pastors preach tithing as an obligation? Many churches don't just encourage giving, they make it mandatory. Some pastors have turned the gospel into a business, using tithing as a tool for control and financial gain. Common fear tactics used today include, if you don't tithe, your finances will be cursed, or if you don't give, God will take his hand off your life. But let's break this down. Pastors often quote Malachi 3:8-10, "Will a man rob God? Yet you rob me." But you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings? You are under a curse. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. But who was God talking to here? He was addressing the corrupt priests of Israel, not Christians in the New Testament. Yet some pastors twist this verse to make believers feel guilty about not giving enough. Meanwhile, what do many of these pastors do? They live in multi-million-dollar mansions, drive luxury cars, and own private jets, all funded by tithes and offerings. Does this sound like what Jesus would want? The Bible warns us about false teachers who exploit people for money. 2 Peter 2:1-3. In their greed, these teachers will exploit you with false words. Instead of serving the church, they turn it into a profit-making empire. And that leads us to one of the biggest fear tactics of all. Will you go to hell if you don't tithe? Some churches go as far as saying that if you don't tithe, you're not saved. If your church teaches this, get out immediately. This is one of the biggest lies being preached today. Let's set the record straight. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that not tithing sends you to hell. Nowhere does it say your salvation depends on giving money. Nowhere does it say financial blessings only come from tithing. Salvation is through Jesus, not tithing. Ephesians 2:8-9 says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." If tithing were required for salvation, then poor people would have no hope of being saved. But Jesus praised a widow who gave just 2 small coins. She wasn't giving out of obligation. she was giving out of love. So if a pastor tells you that your salvation depends on your wallet, that's a huge red flag. What does God really want? God doesn't need your money. He wants your heart. True giving is done out of love, not pressure. It should be done cheerfully, not out of fear. Instead of making pastors rich, giving should help the poor, support true ministries, and serve God's kingdom. The Bible never says you have to give 10% of your income to a church to be blessed. And before you give, ask yourself, are you doing it for God or because you've been pressured? What do you think? Have churches twisted the meaning of tithing? Let's discuss in the comments. And if this video opened your eyes, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more biblical truths.